Trust dies the moment you understand it was already gone. The papers arrived on a Tuesday in April, during the ordinary hour between dinner and television, when the dishwasher was running and the house smelled like garlic and the kind of quiet that pretends to be peace. Michael brought them to the kitchen table in a manila folder, the kind you buy at office supply stores, with the metal clasp already loosened from use. He set them down between the salt shaker and her coffee mug, the one with the small chip on the rim that she'd been meaning to replace for 3 years, but never did. "Just some restructuring," he said. "State planning stuff. Ted says it'll save us a fortune in taxes down the line." Ted was his accountant. Ted had been his accountant for 12 years. Ted played golf on Saturdays and sent a fruit basket every Christmas. She had met Ted exactly 4 times. Michael tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "You'll need to sign a few places. No rush. Whenever you get a chance." Then he walked into the living room, and she heard the television turn on, heard the low murmur of the news, the distant voice of someone reporting on something that had already happened to someone else. This isn't fiction. This is how love disappears, one manila folder at a time. They had been married for 16 years. Not the kind of marriage people wrote songs about, but the kind that existed in the texture of ordinary days. The rhythm of coffee made in the morning, the sound of his keys in the bowl by the door, the way they both knew without speaking that Thursday nights were for Thai takeout, and she always ordered the same thing. They had built a life the way most people do, one choice leading to another, one year folding into the next, until suddenly there were mortgage payments and a daughter in middle school and a dog that needed medication for arthritis. Jennifer, that was her name, though sometimes she felt like she'd worn it so long it no longer quite fit. Worked from home 3 days a week, designing graphics for a marketing firm that paid well enough to matter but not well enough to leave. Michael managed operations for a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of job that required him to travel twice a month and come home tired in a way that made conversation feel like effort. Their daughter, Chloe, was 13 and had recently discovered that her parents were both boring and invasive, often simultaneously. She lived in her room with the door closed, emerging only for meals and the occasional request for money or a ride to a friend's house. Jennifer had read that this was normal. She chose to believe it. The house itself was a 3-bedroom colonial they'd bought 9 years ago, back when the market was different and they'd felt certain about things they no longer discussed. It sat on a corner lot with a maple tree in the front yard that dropped helicopters every spring. The tree was beautiful in October. In April, it was just beginning to show green. Everything looked fine. That was the problem. Everything had looked fine for so long that Jennifer had stopped checking. The folder sat on the kitchen table for 2 days. Architected narrative pacing from stability through discovery. I'm building the world before, showing the ordinary life, the routine, the appearance of stability. Now I need to move toward the fracture. When she actually looks at the papers, I should show her initial approach to it as mundane, not suspicious. The discovery should feel gradual. I'm at about 550 words. I need to continue building, then move into the fracture section. She didn't ignore it intentionally. There were other things, a project deadline, a parent-teacher conference that got rescheduled, the dog's appointment at the vet. The folder became part of the landscape, something she would get to eventually, the same way she would get to cleaning out the hall closet or finally replacing that chipped mug. On Thursday evening, after Chloe had gone upstairs and Michael had fallen asleep in front of a movie he'd seen before, Jennifer made herself tea and sat down at the table. The folder was exactly where he'd left it. She pulled it toward her, careful not to spill. The first few pages were dense with language she expected: revocable trust, grantor, beneficiary, fiduciary duty. Words that sounded important in the way legal words always do, designed to obscure as much as they clarify. She skimmed, signing where the small yellow tabs indicated, her signature looking the same as it always had, a muscle memory from 16 years of signing tax returns and school permission slips and mortgage refinances. She almost stopped there. She almost closed the folder, set it aside, moved on with her evening. But there was a stapled section near the back, separate from the trust document itself, an addendum. She flipped to it without thinking, the way you might turn a page simply because it's there. Dissolution provisions, the header read. She blinked, read it again. The language was careful, precise, and utterly clear. In the event of divorce or legal separation, the trust assets would be distributed according to a formula that heavily favored the grantor, Michael, with specific protections that isolated his business interests, his retirement accounts, his inherited property from his mother's estate. Jennifer's name appeared throughout, but always in the conditional. If the marriage is intact, should the spouse remain? In the absence of dissolution proceedings, there was a timeline, a structure, a map of how everything would be divided if they ended. Her hands went cold, not numb, cold, the way metal feels in winter. She read the section twice, then a third time. Each time, the words meant exactly what they had meant before. The television was still on in the other room. She could hear the low hum of it, the occasional swell of music from whatever movie Michael had surrendered to. The dishwasher had finished its cycle an hour ago. The house had that late evening stillness, the kind that usually felt like safety. She looked at the date on the document. It had been drafted 6 weeks ago, signed by Michael and witnessed by someone whose name she didn't recognize, notarized on a date when he told her he was at a regional conference in Columbus. Jennifer set the papers down, stood up, walked to the sink and poured the tea out, watching the amber liquid circle the drain. She rinsed the cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet. Then she went upstairs and lay down in the dark, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling while Michael snored softly beside her. She didn't know then that this would be the last night she would sleep in that bed without counting the hours until morning. The first few days passed, the way days do when you're pretending nothing has changed. She made breakfast, drove Chloe to school, answered emails, sat through video calls where people discussed brand guidelines and Q2 projections and whether the tagline should be innovative or transformative. She smiled when appropriate, nodded, said things that made sense, but underneath, she was calculating. If he had drawn up dissolution provisions, he had been thinking about divorce. If he had been thinking about divorce, he had been planning. If he had been planning, then the life she thought they were living, the one with Thai takeout on Thursdays and the shared calendar and the casual mention of, maybe we should finally take that trip to Italy, had been a performance. Or worse, it had been real for her and something else entirely for him. She didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, she started looking. It began with small things. His phone, which had never been off limits, suddenly seemed to live in his pocket. When he did set it down, it was always face down. He changed his passcode. She noticed because she'd borrowed his phone once to check a recipe and found herself locked out. When she mentioned it, he shrugged. Security update, made me change it, you know how it is. She did not know how it was. She checked their credit card statements, something she hadn't done in months because they'd always just trusted that bills were paid, that money was managed, that neither of them was hiding anything worth finding. There were charges she didn't recognize, dinners at restaurants they'd never been to together, a hotel in Cincinnati on a night he'd said he was staying with a colleague, flowers ordered from a service they didn't use. She'd always gotten her roses from the grocery store on their anniversary, and he'd always seemed fine with that. She didn't confront him about those either. She took screenshots, saved them in a folder on her laptop labeled Taxes 2024, because irony felt like the only power she had left. The receipts piled up, not in her hands but in her mind. Each one was a small, neat piece of evidence that the man she'd married had become someone she no longer knew. Or maybe, and this thought arrived like ice water, maybe he'd always been this person, and she'd simply never looked closely enough to see. There was a necklace. She found it in his car, tucked into the console, between 2 empty coffee cups and a parking garage ticket from downtown. It was delicate, silver, with a small pendant in the shape of a crescent moon. She held it up to the light. It wasn't hers, it wasn't Chloe's, it wasn't his mother's. She put it back exactly where she'd found it. That night, over dinner that none of them really ate, Michael mentioned casually that he'd be in Chicago the following week. 4 days, client meetings. He'd be staying at the Hilton near the airport. "Do you want me to bring you back anything?" he asked, the same question he always asked before trips, the kind of domestic reflex that meant nothing and everything. "No," Jennifer said. "I'm fine." Chloe looked up from her phone. "Can you bring me a snow globe?" Michael smiled. "Sure, sweetheart. I'll find you one." Jennifer watched him smile, watched the way it reached his eyes, easy and practiced and real enough that even she might have believed it if she hadn't already stopped believing in anything. After dinner, Michael went upstairs to pack. Jennifer stayed at the table, staring at the salt shaker, the same salt shaker that had been there when the manila folder arrived, back when her life had still made sense. Chloe appeared in the doorway. "Mom, are you okay?" Jennifer looked at her daughter, at the soft concern in her face, at the way she was still young enough to believe that asking if someone was okay might actually help. "I'm fine, baby, just tired." "You've been tired a lot lately." "I know." Chloe hesitated, then disappeared back upstairs, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Jennifer sat alone in the kitchen, in the house that smelled like garlic and the ordinary wreckage of an ordinary life, and wondered when exactly she had learned to lie so smoothly. The confrontation happened on a Saturday. Michael was home from Chicago, came back a day early, actually, saying the meetings had wrapped up faster than expected. He seemed lighter somehow, as if travel had unburdened him. He whistled while making coffee, suggested they all go out for breakfast. Jennifer said she had work to catch up on. Chloe had plans with friends. They didn't go to breakfast. Instead, that afternoon, while Chloe was at the mall and the house was empty except for the two of them, Jennifer walked into the living room where Michael was watching a game and said, very quietly, "I need to talk to you." He muted the television, looked up. "Sure, what's up?" She sat in the chair across from him, not the couch. The distance felt important. "The trust documents," she said. "The ones you had me sign. I read them." "Okay." His face was neutral, patient. "Is there a question about something?" "There's a whole section about divorce, about what happens to everything if we split up." He nodded, slowly. "That's standard in estate planning," Ted said. "I don't care what Ted said." Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "Why would you draft a plan for our divorce without telling me?" "It's not a plan, Jen. It's a precaution. These things are they're just protective measures. Smart financial planning." "Who are you protecting against?" Silence, the kind that fills a room like water. "Against uncertainty," he said finally. "Whose uncertainty, mine or yours?" Michael shifted in his seat, looked at the television, still muted, showing men running across a field toward something she couldn't see. "You're making this into something it's not." "Then tell me what it is." "It's what I said. Taxes, structure, legal protection." "There were charges on the credit card," she said. "Cincinnati, restaurants we've never been to, a hotel room on a Tuesday night." His jaw tightened. "I had a meeting." "There were flowers, ordered last month." "I never got any flowers." "Jen, there's a necklace in your car." The room went still. Not quiet. Still. As if every molecule of air had stopped moving. Michael looked at her. Really looked at her. And in his eyes she saw it. Not guilt, but the exhaustion of someone who'd been caught and was too tired to pretend anymore. "Who is she?" Jennifer asked. "It's not—" He stopped, rubbed his face. "It's complicated." "That's not an answer." "Her name is Lauren. She works in our Chicago office. It's not— We haven't—" But his voice trailed off, and Jennifer understood that whatever he was about to say didn't matter. The haven't was already a lie, or would be soon, or was the kind of technical truth that felt worse than lying. "How long?" "Does it matter?" "Yes," he sighed, a long, slow exhale that sounded like surrender. 8 months. Maybe 9. 9 months. The length of a pregnancy, the length of a school year, the length of time she'd been living in a house with a man who'd been building a life with someone else. "The trust," she said. "You knew. When you had me sign those papers, you knew you were going to do this." "I wasn't sure. I'm still not sure. I wanted to have a plan, in case." "In case what?" "In case it didn't work out. Between us." "Between us?" She almost laughed. "You're fucking someone in Chicago, and the problem is us?" He flinched. "I didn't mean— Get out. Jen, get out of this room, out of my sight." "I don't care where you go, but I can't look at you right now." Michael stood, hesitated. "We should talk about this. We should figure out—" The trust already figured it out, Jennifer said. You made sure of that. He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heard the bedroom door close, heard the shower turn on, as if hot water could wash away what had just been spoken aloud. Jennifer sat in the chair, staring at the television screen where silent men still ran toward their silent goal, and felt the house shift around her. Not collapse, shift, as if the walls had been built on sand and were only now revealing how fragile the foundation had always been. The days after the confrontation blurred together in a way that felt both endless and instantaneous. Michael moved into the guest room. Jennifer told Chloe that Dad was having trouble sleeping and needed his own space for a while, a lie that felt truer than any truth she could have offered. Chloe didn't ask questions. She was 13. She knew how to pretend not to notice. Jennifer went through the motions, made meals, answered emails, walked the dog. But everything felt hollow now, performed. She would stand at the sink, washing dishes, and realize she'd been standing there for 10 minutes, water running, hands unmoving. She would sit down to work and find herself staring at the screen, not seeing anything, just hearing the same questions loop through her mind. How long had she been invisible? When had she stopped mattering? Michael tried to talk to her. Multiple times. He would appear in doorways, hesitant, searching for words that wouldn't come. But Jennifer had nothing to say to him. Or rather, she had too much, and none of it would change what had already happened. One evening, he said, I ended it with Lauren. I told her it was over. Jennifer was folding laundry. She didn't stop folding. Okay. I want to fix this. I want to try. She set down the shirt she'd been holding, one of his, blue, the same blue he always wore to important meetings. Do you love her? He hesitated. The hesitation was the answer. Get a lawyer, Jennifer said. I already have one. He left the room. She finished the laundry, folded every shirt, every pair of pants, every sock, put his clothes in a basket and left it outside the guest room door. The lawyers handled everything. That was the strange mercy of divorce. You could dismantle a life and barely have to speak to the person who'd helped you build it. The trust did exactly what it was designed to do. Michael kept the business interests, the retirement accounts, the property from his mother. Jennifer kept the house, for now, and enough money to survive, but not enough to feel secure. It was fair, the lawyer said. Equitable. As if fairness could be measured in dollar amounts. Chloe, who'd finally been told the truth in language softened by therapy sessions and careful phrasing, spent weekends with Michael at his new apartment downtown. She came back quieter each time, carrying that particular exhaustion that children wear when they realize their parents are just people who failed at something important. Jennifer tried to explain, tried to find words that would help her daughter understand that love was complicated, that sometimes people hurt each other without meaning to, that none of this was her fault. But Chloe just looked at her with eyes that seemed suddenly older and said, I know, Mom, I know. Looking back now, and Jennifer did look back more than she wanted to, she could see the fractures that had always been there, the small disappointments, the conversations that never quite finished, the way they'd stopped asking each other about their days, because the answers had become predictable. She remembered their wedding, 16 years ago, in a church decorated with white roses. She remembered Michael's vows, spoken in a voice that trembled slightly. I promise to be honest, to be faithful, to build a life with you that honors us both. Had he meant it then? She thought he had. But somewhere between the wedding and the manila folder, between the promises and the trust documents, something had shifted. Maybe he'd fallen out of love. Maybe he'd met someone who made him feel the way Jennifer used to make him feel, back when everything was new and possible. Or maybe, and this was the thought that arrived late at night when the house was dark and she couldn't sleep, maybe love had nothing to do with it. Maybe he'd simply stopped trying, stopped seeing her, stopped believing that their life together mattered enough to protect. She'd asked him once, months after he'd moved out, why he hadn't just told her, why the secret planning, the hidden documents, the affair. I didn't want to hurt you, he'd said. She'd laughed, actually laughed, a short, bitter sound. How did that work out? He hadn't answered. A year passed, then another. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. Not the same Tuesday the papers had arrived, but close enough that Jennifer noticed. She signed the final documents in a conference room that smelled like coffee In desperation, surrounded by lawyers who treated dissolution like a transaction, which she supposed it was, Michael wasn't there. They'd agreed to that. Afterward, Jennifer drove home. The house was hers now, fully and legally hers, and walked into the kitchen where the same salt shaker still sat on the table, the same chipped mug still hung in the cabinet. She'd meant to replace these things. She never had. She made tea, sat down, looked at the space where the manila folder had been. Chloe was 16 now, nearly 17. She'd grown taller, sharper, more certain of herself in the way teenagers do when they've been forced to grow up too quickly. She split her time between houses, between parents, between versions of a family that no longer existed in any recognizable form. But she was okay. Not happy, not yet, but okay. And that felt like something. Michael had married Lauren 8 months after the divorce was final. Jennifer learned about it through Chloe, who'd been invited to the wedding but chose not to go. They lived in a condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the river. Sometimes Jennifer wondered if Lauren knew about the trust, about the dissolution provisions that might already be drafted, waiting in some lawyer's file cabinet for the day when love became inconvenient again. But mostly, Jennifer didn't think about Michael at all. She'd gone back to work full-time, taken on more clients, learned to manage money in ways she'd never had to before. She'd adopted another dog, a rescue with anxiety issues that matched her own. She'd started therapy, started running, started, slowly, to rebuild a life that looked nothing like the one she'd imagined at 27 in a church full of white roses. Friends asked if she was dating. She wasn't. Maybe someday, maybe not. It didn't feel urgent. What felt urgent was this: learning to trust herself again, learning to see the signs she'd missed, learning to believe that she could build something solid without needing someone else to sign off on the foundation. Some nights, she still woke up at 2 a.m., heart racing, mind replaying every small moment she'd ignored. The phone calls he'd taken in another room, the business trips that lasted one day too long, the way he'd stopped reaching for her hand when they watched television. But those nights came less frequently now. And when they did, she'd get up, make tea, sit in the kitchen where everything had first fallen apart, and remind herself, you survived this. You're surviving this. You'll keep surviving this. On a Sunday afternoon in October, 3 years after the manila folder, Jennifer was raking leaves in the front yard when a car pulled up. Michael's car. He got out, hesitated, then walked toward her. Hey, he said. Hey. I was dropping Chloe off. She forgot her charger. She's upstairs. They stood in the yard, the maple tree dropping helicopters between them, the air sharp with autumn. The house looks good, Michael said. Thanks. He shifted his weight. Listen, I've been wanting to say this for a while. I'm sorry for how everything happened, for the trust, for not being honest, for all of it. Jennifer leaned against the rake, looked at him. This man who'd been her husband, her partner, the father of her child, this stranger. Okay, she said. That's it? Just okay? What do you want me to say, Michael? That I forgive you? That it's all fine now? I don't know. Something. She almost laughed. You planned for our divorce while I was still sleeping next to you. You had lawyers draft documents to protect yourself from me before I even knew I needed protecting from you. You fell in love with someone else and didn't have the courage to tell me until I found the evidence. What is there to say? He looked down. I was a coward. Yeah, you were. Silence. A car passed on the street. Somewhere, a dog barked. I miss you sometimes, Michael said quietly. You miss the version of me that didn't ask questions. He flinched. That's not. It is, and that's okay. I miss versions of people too. I miss who I thought you were, but that person was never real. Neither was the person I was pretending to be. Chloe appeared in the doorway, charger in hand. Ready, Dad? Yes, sweetheart. I'm ready. Jennifer watched them drive away. Then she went back to raking leaves, the repetitive motions soothing, meditative. The pile grew larger, the yard grew clearer. That evening, Jennifer sat at the kitchen table. The same table, always the same table, and pulled out a notebook. She'd been thinking about something for months now, a kind of project, though she wasn't sure what to call it. She wanted to write it all down. Not for publication, not for therapy, just to have a record, to be able to say, this happened, This was real, this was my life, and I lived through it. She started with the opening line, the one that felt most true. Trust dies the moment you understand it was already gone. Then she kept writing. About the manila folder, about the necklace and the receipts and the dissolution provisions drafted by a man she'd loved while he was planning to leave her. But also about what came after. About rebuilding. About learning to sleep alone without feeling lonely. About teaching Chloe that love could fail and life could continue. About the strange, unexpected peace that came from no longer having to pretend. She wrote until her hand cramped, until the tea went cold, until the words on the page looked like a map of something she'd crossed and survived. When she finally stopped, it was late. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel like loneliness, but now just felt like stillness. Jennifer closed the notebook, put it away in a drawer with the tax documents and old receipts and all the other evidence of a life that had been and was no more. Then she went upstairs, checked on the dog, turned off the lights, and climbed into bed. She didn't think about Michael or Lauren or the trust document that had once seemed like the end of everything. She thought instead about Chloe growing strong and sharp, about the house that was hers now, fully hers, about the maple tree in the yard that would lose its leaves and grow them back, season after season, resilient and indifferent. She thought about morning and what she might make for breakfast, and whether it was finally time to replace that chipped mug. And then, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Jennifer fell asleep easily. Not because the pain was gone, but because she'd finally learned to carry it without letting it crush her. Peace came slowly, disguised as exhaustion, but it came.